So, welcome to our Purpose Power Presence webinar on purposeful leadership and power. And Purpose Power Presence was founded by Hetty Einzig and I 10 years ago. So we work with women leaders and change makers. And we've really enjoyed having these sessions over this year and exploring the whole topic of healthy power, which has never been more needed in these times than we need them at the moment. I invite you to switch off any distractions and give your full attention to our hour here today and really give yourself the permission, yes, to fully be present with each other and give yourself over to this subject, which I'm sure will be fascinating. So I'm going to hand over to Hetty, who's going to introduce us to our topic for today.
Thank you, Liz, and welcome everybody. It's those who've just joined, we're putting into the chat where we're dialing in from so that we get a real sense of the reach and geographical interconnectedness, particularly pertinent today, of our group today. So, as Liz said, this is part of our series on power and purposeful leadership. We are recording, and I think Liz has said that. Our focus comes from a phrase that was coined by someone called Margaret Wheatley. She's bound to be familiar to some of you, but maybe not all. Margaret Wheatley is a scientist and a thought leader, really, in the field of leadership and coaching. And she coined the phrase some time ago now, the need to create islands of sanity. What did she mean by that? Are we all mad? It's possible in this crazy world. And the idea she sums up in two words. Islands of sanity are places of refuge where we can withdraw from the world to think and reflect, and they're places of possibility. So we aren't just withdrawing from the world because through fear or through disgust or distrust or wanting to isolate ourselves away. We're withdrawing in the same way that we plant seedlings in protected greenhouses to protect them from the weather. We withdraw in order to create possibility. So they're places of creativity. And one very pertinent example that I'm reminded of, particularly seeing amongst our small group here, Liz Gould, I'm reminded of citizens' assemblies. In a sense, a citizens' assembly where people can withdraw from the mainstream of being attacked, as it feels sometimes, by 100 different opinions, social media, hyped up and charged, reactive opinions. We can withdraw to places that are fed by a certain structure of guidelines about how we're going to think together and shared values with a sense of purpose. And thinking about this one day, I was thinking actually what we need is not just islands of sanity, we need archipelagos of sanity. We need to start thinking, how do we join these different groups that we might be part of, that where we feel that sense our nervous systems come down, we can think rather more clearly, characterized often by slowness and a red thread of meaning. And how can we join them together in archipelagos? That is creating more. We'll talk more about that in a moment. We hope that you're going to leave feeling rather more resourced and energized and provoked to think further about this topic and about the archipelagos of sanity in your life. And we understand sanity to mean, it's interesting that most definitions of sanity are in counterpoint to insanity, which I think is rather entertaining. You look it up in the dictionary and there's no real sort of concrete definition of sanity, except some, as I explored a bit further, there, because I'm writing a piece about this. So I've got rather too much to say. I'm going to keep it tight, I hope. But what I like is the linking of sanity with health and with satisfaction. The idea that this is enough. We don't need more and more. We need the kind of rich conversation that creates a feeling of satisfaction, enoughness, fullness, and calm. And what Wheatley describes, she talks about sanity as being any action that creates more life and more possibility. Insane actions destroy life and the future. And I think that this is obviously very pertinent today. You don't need me to tell you that many of us are feeling that sense of anxiety and perhaps low level or even high level generalized concern about the future in a world that's increasingly polarized. So we're looking here today about community. But to begin with, we'd like to turn to you and ask you to think of a recent situation at work or at home when you were working alone on something. It might be you were having to fulfill a report. Perhaps you were editing an essay or an article. Perhaps you were planning a new project. Perhaps you were trying to think through and initiate a totally new thought, but you were on your own and you're feeling stuck. It's not moving forward. Could you reflect on what are some of the feelings? How would you describe that not moving forwardness or that stuckness? And just start populating the chat with some of your feelings. You're on your own, you're at home, as so many of us are these days, and you're trying to work on something that somehow isn't progressing. We invite you to just pop your ideas into the chat, your thoughts. Frustration, anxiety, feeling guilty, culpability. Yes, and Jess, heaviness. Yeah, restlessness. Lots of frustration coming out here, lonely, frustrated. And frustration is a very consuming and tiring emotion to feel. Panicky, palpitations, pressure. Yeah, behinding the chest wall. Very physical, Jane, absolutely. Alone, 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 agitated and empty. And I can echo all of those. I felt all of those at times on my own. And it was the other day, what prompted this idea was that one of the Islands of Sanity that I'm part of is something called the Sustainability Coaching Council. And it grew out of, it's been going since 2019. We used to call ourselves the most unlovely title, the Joint Global Statement Group, which grew out of a joint cross-party group right across the coaching professions of some of us who came together to create a response, an official response, if you like, from the coaching professions, the coaching profession to, at that point, we called it the climate crisis, the climate issues. And we've recently renamed it the Sustainability Coaching Council and created a much broader remit for it. It's gone beyond a simple statement. And we hold round tables very specifically to bring people together in a positive, the refuge and the place of possibility to talk about how can we respond in healthful, sane ways to some of the things that are happening in this world. And I noticed it was not long ago that there was a point we were just about to finalize the name change when a member of the group put her hand up and said, I'm very concerned at one party to this coalition that is she felt exerting undue power. And everybody held their breath for a moment. Was this going to scupper the whole thing? Because initially we had planned to call ourselves the Sustainability Coaching Council. And there were some concerns that council means different things in different geographies, that it might carry too heavy a legal weight and might not be helpful. And I kept my peace at that point. I just watched and listened. But the thing that most impressed me was that within about half an hour, maybe 20 minutes, every voice was heard. Every single person in the group felt able to speak their piece. There was no judgment, no blame. The facilitator didn't raise an eyebrow or give a sigh at things being held up. He simply said, let's hear from everybody. And everybody was encouraged to speak from their heart, from their emotions, not just from their legal or a structural or a policy standpoint. And within 20 minutes, we'd come to a very easy and, I would say, emotionally just resolution to call ourselves the Sustainability Coaching Coalition. And it got me thinking how I came away, as I do from every one of these meetings, which we have about only 4 times a year, feeling not just my nervous system calmed, but my whole being nourished. And I come away feeling that life is possible, that things are possible, that new ideas are possible, and that moving forwards is possible. And I give that very concrete example because we all have those in our lives. These are communities with purpose. They're non-hierarchical. There's a sense of a shared purpose. These are some of the characteristics, I think, of these islands of sanity. There's a sense of web-like filaments, mycelial connections. And recently, coming back to Archipelagos of Sanity, I've been listening to the great Michelle McMahon, a speaker from Australia. She's half Indigenous from the Yorta Yorta people, and her father was an Irish immigrant to Australia. And she straddles westernized academia and the wisdom traditions from the other side of her background. And she reminded us that water also has a web-like filament structure. And these connections enable communication, whether they're mycelial, whether they're the filaments that are contained in the waterways that separate and also, of course, join these different islands of sanity. I'm going to sometimes talk in the real and sometimes in the metaphor, but please take everything I say metaphorically as well. And, of course, in our own bodies. Our bodies are 70 to 80% water, contained in the filaments of our fascia and obviously in our bloodstream and so forth. So there's a very real sense that we are meant to interconnect. We're meant to be connected. So it's no surprise then when we're struggling with something on our own that we should feel isolated. And the danger with all islands is that they become insular. The clue is in the name. An island can become insular, just as Japan did in the 16th, 17th century. It only finally opened up first to the Dutch and then to the world in the 18th century. And there are pros and cons. You can keep at bay the mainstream onslaught of input and stimuli and ideas and persuasions and sort of noise, if you like, of our modern societies. But at the same time, you might close yourself off to interconnectedness and to new ideas and to the capacity for what's now called intercultural understanding. We're moving from a rather British Anglospheric centric idea of multiculturalism to interculturalism, where each culture is respected and valued, each group, each community is respected and heard and valued on its own terms. And then we look, how can we come together and connect? And what do we create that's fresh when we bring that coming together? So it's not about being tolerant. It's not about persuading different cultures to adopt the dominant mainstream culture. It's about partnerships, not dominant cultures. And when we communicate and cooperate, the effect this has on our nervous system is to lower that fight, flight, freeze response. We breathe a bit more freely, and it allows our cognitive responses to filter right the way through our bodies. It becomes a totally embodied response. So the types of conversations that you get that I've been observing, and I'd be interested to hear, Liz, from you, Liz Gould, whether you observe this in the citizens' assemblies, that the types of conversations I observe in the islands of sanity that I belong to are always slower. They're sometimes meandering. They very often include the personal. People bring their personal experience in. They allow people to feel seen and heard. So it's not about bullet points. It's often about purpose, but often without a very tight, rigid agenda. There's pace, there's awareness of others, and there's care and kindness for others. If you want examples of this, a very good place to go is Rutger Bregman's book, Humankind. It's full of examples of collaboration and cooperation based on care and kindness rather than forcing an idea forward. And my colleague Liz Rivers shared with me a wonderful phrase. You'll be able to say, Liz, where it comes from, that Rutger Bregman talks about, I think it's his, isn't it? The Bermuda Triangle of talent. Now, those of you who are familiar with the Bermuda Triangle know that it's a geographical phenomenon where things just disappear. It's like a black hole in the ocean, like the Mare Celeste just disappears. And he refers to this Bermuda Triangle of talent that very often people in law, as it's practiced in certainly Anglo-centric, Anglo-American centric cultures, and finance and consulting, highly talented, highly skilled, highly energized people disappear into that Bermuda Triangle, where instead of using their talents, and this is Bregman's latest book about, I can't remember what he calls it, moral something. I've got it hiding over there, but I'm not going to get it right
Moral
now.
ambition.
Moral ambition.
Mm.
And I would contend that Islands of Sanity are the opposite to that. We bring all our talents in a spirit of sharing and humility to the sense of community. And if I forget when we end, because I'm just about to hand over now to Liz to take us through a somatic experience of what this involves. But remind me, somebody, to read you a quote from Bell Hooks at the end. It's a beautiful quote about the need for communion and for interconnectedness is written in to the way we are created as human. Communion and contribution are our birthright. They're written into our DNA and they're written into our absolute birthright. And I contend that many of us yearn for these the whole of our lives if we don't find them. So for a moment, let's pass to the body, and Liz is going to take us through a somatic experience of community and communion.
Yeah. So you've had a lot of stimulation for the brain. If you take yourself back to that scenario that Hetty invited you to imagine at the beginning of a call, a time when you were working on something on your own and feeling stuck and just noticing the emotions that get stirred up by that situation. And now I invite you to feel into those emotions and notice what posture you take on and maybe intensify it a little bit more. So notice, do you tense up your muscles anywhere? What's your breathing like? Does it get more shallow? What's the quality of your thoughts, not just the content, but are they slow and smooth or are they fast and jagged? So the quality of your thoughts, your emotions, and your bodily sensations and how you organize somatically. So take a moment to register that, whether that feels familiar. And if this were a sub-personality, an aspect of you, would you give it a name? Would it be your critic or your driver? Or just think about whether it's a familiar patterning way of being. And take a moment to really register that. Now, let go of that. And what we're going to do is shift into centering. So with your feet on the ground, you're sitting, feeling your sitting bones on the chair, arms uncrossed. And bring your attention to your spine and take a breath in and imagine the breath going up your spine. Breathing up and then exhale, sighing out your breath down the front of your body, sighing out any tension and releasing it, sending it down into the earth to be transformed. And once again, breathing in up your spine Think of someone that makes you smile, and as you exhale, sighing any tension out, let that smile come to your face and radiate out, softening your chest, sighing that out. And the very act of smiling, turning the corners up of your mouth, even if you don't feel like it, automatically makes us start to feel better and starts to produce that oxytocin connection hormone. And now stretch your arms out, wiggle your fingers, stretch out the space around you in front, behind, above your head, below your feet. And if you're in a meeting where you can't do this, you can always just stretch your arms beside you and wiggle your fingers. Radiate out into the space that you're in. Look at all four corners of the room and fill the space that you're in. Okay. And now, once again, call to mind that situation where you were feeling alone. Notice, do you feel more resourceful? Has something shifted around that? Just take a moment to track your level of resourcefulness in relation to that situation. And most people will find that they've gone from feeling contracted, which reinforces the sense of separation, that we are separate beings. But as soon as we somatically and expand our muscles and extend, we immediately feel more resourceful and that there is more possibility and less on our own with things. So those of you who've done this, who've attended these webinars before, will be familiar with that part of the exercise, the centering exercise. We're going to take it a level further now. And I want you to think about that situation that you're grappling with. And I want you to now visualize it successfully happening. So whatever your wishes, hopes, and dreams are for that particular project, put it out in the future in front of you and picture it or feel it, whatever your sensory, or hear it, whatever sensory references work for you, but have a sense of that happening, flourishing, taking place. Really enjoy that. And now with that expanded sense of your presence, so that radiating out in all directions that we did earlier, we're going to take that, what's usually a sphere, and now shape it into a triangle. And the point is going to be out in the distance where that vision is of your project succeeding and manifesting. So put it out into the future. And the flat side of the triangle is behind you. So you've got 2 points going forward and one, and the flat side behind us. Notice what it feels like to change your presence from a circle to a triangle. As women, we're very socialized into being inclusive and circular, but taking that energy and being very intentional with it is often less comfortable and feels less familiar. But just like the prow of a boat is so much more effective at passing through the water if it has a prow, as opposed to just being a square or a circle, it makes us much more powerful and much more able to move towards our intentions and the things that we want to manifest in the world. So enjoy that feeling of taking your presence and shaping it into a triangle. So we've got the focus in front, and now behind you, think about your sources of support. And it could be people in your life, people who are in your life now. Imagine them literally standing behind you and maybe even putting their hands on your back. And often just the imagination of somebody having their hands on our back calms our nervous system. It could be somebody from younger, maybe somebody who was a mentor to you when you were a child, significant relative or a teacher or a mentor in some other way. Those people who saw something in you, believed in you, invested in you. Call them, even if they're not present in your life now, they're still resources for you. So call your supporters and mentors. It could be something from nature, a place that you go to, or a place that even if you go to in your imagination, it feeds you a special power place that you have. So call that in. Or it could be a group that you're part of. Hetty talked about the importance of these groups where we come together in a non-agendered way where it's non-hierarchical, where we feel seen, where our voices are heard. So think about those groups that you're part of, perhaps would like to be part of. You'd like more of that in your life. And imagine those. So calling in all of those resources. And if it's something from nature, sometimes it can be almost like feeling the breeze blowing through you, or a river or a mountain at your back, something that you can draw on. And allow all of that strength to flow through you, to resource you from behind, and then see your intention flowing towards that visualization. And notice now when you think about this project, what feels possible, what resources are available to you. What are you seeing now that when you were in your separate contracted space wasn't available to you? Let your nervous system drink that in, really bathe in that resourcefulness, knowing that all of this is available to you. We've been taught from an early age to disconnect from our sources of power, and yet they're all around us if we remember to connect with them. When you feel ready, if you want to take a moment to perhaps jot down a few notes of what you noticed, what your resources are, perhaps some resources that you'd forgotten about, and what your archipelagos of sanity are. Who or what are the beings, groups within your ecosystem that nourish you and remind you that you're not alone.
So maybe now's the moment then, Liz, to take this into a wider imaginative exercise. Coming back to the metaphor of archipelagos, what are archipelagos? They're groups of islands that are joined by water. There could be rivers, it could be the ocean, it could be a lake, it could be a sort of marshland, salt marshland. There's many different watery ecosystems. And very often archipelagos are formed by volcanic eruption, for which read perhaps the disruptive times that we're living in, things that happen in our own lives. Maybe something happens in our own lives that means we can't go on in the way we've been going on, this idea of muscling up and going it alone, ploughing our own ship with no help or support. And they're split off from the mainland, but they're not that far from the mainland. They become fragments of that landmass at a distance across water. So there's this sense of connection. And the idea with an archipelago that sparks in me is I love the idea of, as it were, getting into my boat and going from one island to another. And it's not so far that you get all either excited or afeared. It's not a big journey where you have to take lots of baggage. It's near enough to perhaps anticipate a friendly welcome, but just far enough to stimulate a bit of curiosity. It's not a long voyage. And across the water, the passage from one space to another, from one group to another, from one island to another. Water is a wonderful metaphor for the unconscious, for that space of just letting the water do the work, letting the flow do the work, letting the sleep do the work. And our lives of intense busyness are, it's very rare that we take a pause between one meeting and the next, between one task and the next. Many of us here will be either self-employed or have the kinds of jobs where you're literally juggling or having to move from one project to another, switching your brain into these different things without actually having the time and the breathing space to start seeing the threads that join them. What are the links? So we'd now like to give you, we'll take maybe just under 10 minutes, I'll time it. Grab a pen. I can see many of you have got pens in hands because you're scribbling notes, and a blank sheet of paper. Now just take a piece of paper and start to draw your watery ecosystem, your archipelagos. And by this I mean it can look anything like you want it to look. I often draw a mind map, and I start with one group, as I mentioned before, the SCC, the Sustainability Coaching Coalition. And then that reminds me, oh yes, there's one person in there and I'm in another group with her. Or it makes me think of the similar vibe to the groups that Liz and I run monthly, the anima groups, where we allow space for that kind of interconnected thinking. Okay, so never enough time to draw. Often in our programs, we allow a good long time for drawing these kind of ecosystemic maps. They're a wonderful way just to remind ourselves of the connections, the webs of connections that we're involved with. So now we've got time just about 10 minutes for sharing. What insights have you gathered, both or either from the somatic exercise of feeling your supporters, your posse, your gang behind your back, or from this ecosystemic, watery ecosystems map and this idea of the combination of red threads of meaning that travel between islands, the similar but different, the varieties that we find in archipelago connected islands. I always think of Darwin and the Galapagos Islands, which is an archipelago again, and where Charles Darwin discovered varieties of finches on the different islands that were quite particular to each island, only just a short boat ride away. So each island has its own little ecosystem, but they're connected.
I think we need to, we're moving towards our close. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're taking a break over the summer and we'll be back again on the 17th of September. So we've set dates for the autumn, September, October, November. And we'll send a follow-up email with a recording of this. So we'll finish off with bell hooks. We'll send the dates so you can put those in your diary. And then the subjects will be announced closer to the time, but still all around the theme of purposeful power. If you want to go deeper, our offerings, we have a 9-month group, which we run every year, starting in January. I know some of you in the group have taken part in or are currently taking part in that group. That's called Anima. And the dates for that are on our website for 2026. And we also have our 2-day in-person program, the Athena Leadership Intensive, which is happening in November. The date's about to be announced within the next week or so. So if that calls to you, watch out for that. And it would be lovely to see you in one or other of those and keep joining us in these gatherings as well. So this is our intention, is that this is very much part of your archipelagos of sanity and a place where you can come and feel restored with like-minded and like-hearted women. So I'll hand back to Hetty to end with the bell hooks.
Very quickly, because I'm mindful of the time. This is from a book called Communion, The Female Search for Love. And she talks about communion. And this is a quote from someone called Susan Griffin. And so bell hooks quote Susan Griffin. So it's not actually a quote from bell hooks. And Susan Griffin says, "The wish for communion exists in the body. It is not for strategic reasons alone that gathering together has been at the heart of every movement for social change. These meetings were in themselves the realizations of a desire that is at the core of human imaginings, the desire to locate ourselves in community, to make our survival a shared effort, to experience a palpable reverence in our connections with each other and the earth, and I say the water, that sustain us. Go well,
Mm.
enjoy your archipelagos, enjoy the summer. We look forward to seeing as many of you as possible again in September.
Mm.